What's up, everybody? In today's episode, we are talking about axle swaps. More specifically, how to swap newer axles under your old Ford truck. So if that is a project you have been looking into or something you have been trying to figure out, this video is for you. So there's nothing to it but do it. Stay tuned. All right, you guys, the whole purpose of this video is to show you guys how we did our axle swap. There are so many questions about them on Facebook, Reddit pages, Instagram, any social media, internet pages, and forums on how to take a newer axle and put it under your older truck. Now, this video isn't going to be exactly precise to your application because there's so many different axles, so many different gear ratios, and so many different trucks that it's not going to be exactly what you're looking for. But this video is going to give you kind of an in-depth look into how we approached it, what axles we bought, why we bought them, why we went with the gear ratio we had, and how we went about doing it. Like I said, it's not going to be a step-by-step video because we do have long-form videos on that. This is just going to give you guys a short little rundown on what we did, how we did it, how easy it is, and also kind of what questions and concerns and issues you might run into if you try to do this axle swap yourself. So without any further introduction, let's get into it. All right, we're going to start with the rear axle and go in the same order that we installed them. So we installed the rear axle first, then moved to the front as I found them and purchased them. So the rear axle is a 2016 or 2015. I don't remember which one was the 15 and the 16, so I might mix up the two. They're both 15 and 16s combined. Don't hate me in the comments. They're pretty much synonymous. The 15 and the 16s are pretty much identical, if not identical. So if I mess up and call one a 15 or 16 and the other one a 15 or a 16, just know that they're both a 15 or a 16. So anyways, I digress. We started off with the rear axle. Now I went to I went over to Oregon for the rear. The front is from Amon, Idaho. The rear, I drove over to Oregon to buy it. It is from a wrecked 2015 or 16 6.7 Power Stroke. It was a box truck, I believe. Anyways, it was a 650, and I thought when I purchased it that all 650s and 750s were a 10-lug bolt pattern. Now, I was dead wrong. It sucks. It also cost me some money, but I will kind of go through the process of what we did after that. So anyways, went over to Oregon, picked up a rear axle, and Kyle and I got going on installing it. So I was hopeful that I was going to be able to reuse the same spring packs that were also on the 15 or the 16 Power Stroke that I bought this off of. Turns out the 15-16 spring packs are a little bit too wide. It would have made our center line way off. I didn't want to punch out these rivets and expand them and remount them. So Kyle has confidence that once we remove this axle, remove the spring pack, we will get them repacked. And he's confident that they will be just like new. The repack Boise Spring Company, they will repack them and they will also recoat them. So when we get these back, they are going to be pretty much brand spanking new. If they are damaged at all, they will replace them. And if they're heavily damaged, they will suggest buying new springs. So at the end of the day, when the truck is driving on the road, we're essentially going to have brand new spring packs, which is awesome, especially for hauling. So the swap was extremely easy. We removed our old 1976 rear axle, slid it out of the way, and we brought in the new 2015/16 rear axle. We even have some of the parts underneath. Sorry, I know it's a mess, but we're keeping every single little part from the front and rear axle just in case we either need to buy something new that works with it or if we need to go back to the old hardware. So, for example, we have all of the seals and bearings from the hub assemblies. We have those guys go up underneath to clamp right there. The U-bolts, and then those are obviously the shocks from the front axle. So, like I said, the swap was super easy. Brought out the old one, put in the new one. Now, I was surprised at how well everything fit. So the only thing we had to reuse from the old axle was this guy right here. I I assume this axle had one on it, but when I went to buy it from the salvage yard, they probably lost it, or maybe they sold it because they sell individual parts like that. So that's the only thing we're using from the old axle. You might even be able to say it's incorporated in the spring pack. This one wasn't, for example. So on the axle, we kept these from the old ones, but everything else is from the 2016 or 15 rear axle. So obviously you have your lower mounts, and then you have your upper mounts right here, and then also the U-bolts, because these were attached to the spring pack, so hence why we have all the hardware for it. But the angles of the pre-existing upper mounts worked. We just had to use the lower and the upper ones to make everything fit. So the pilot holes that are on the spring packs, you can see them right here. There's one on the top and the bottom. Those go and self-center on the rear axle, and they fit perfectly. The measurements lined up perfectly. So I was very thankful for that. The uppers fit really well. Now they're not perfectly centered, so we are going to have to adjust them and really triangulate and make sure everything is centered. Just so that way we have obviously a rear axle that is driving down the road straight, not axle. Oh yeah, axle. And then we also have to make sure our drive line is also spinning directly towards the transmission, and there's no angle, which could cause us some long-term damage in that way. So rear axle, there's not a whole lot to say. Slid out the old one, slid in the new one. If you're just doing a rear axle swap, it took us probably 30 minutes. I kid you not. It was so quick, so simple, so easy. The issue that came up with us and our rear axle was going back to saying that I thought everything was a 10-lug bolt pattern. These military rear wheels are a 10-lug bolt pattern, and so I thought the rear axle was a 10-lug bolt pattern. Turns out it was only an 8-lug bolt pattern. So these are the hub assemblies from the 15-16 rear axle. The issue with the rear axle and why it didn't fit perfectly, which it did, but our wheels didn't, was because of the 8-lug bolt pattern instead of 10. So what we had to do was we had to go out. We spent, I kid you not, day after day after day finding the correct hub assembly that had the correct bearings on the inside, the inner and the outer, the correct seals that would match up with this rear axle. So what we found was the company that makes them is Conmet. It's not Ford. They pretty much hire out or contract out this other company. Conmet makes hub assemblies for tons of different manufacturers and applications. Their shipping was less than subpar. It was so terrible, but the product works really well. So here we have the old hub assembly, and we just tossed on the new hub assembly with new bearings, new seals. They come with the rotors installed, so it also has new rotors. So at the end of the day, pulling out the rear axle is super easy. Putting in the new rear axle was super easy. If I didn't have these wheels, the swap would have been done in 30 minutes to an hour. Super quick, super easy. However, since we're upgrading, or I had to upgrade the hub assemblies, that's what took us a good portion of time, effort, and money. These things right here for the new ones, I believe they are $650 a piece or $750. So I almost paid more, if not I did pay more, for the hub assemblies that I did the actual rear axle. So this rear axle is also a 510 a 610 or a 620. I don't remember which one. Sorry, there's so many things that's going on with this truck that I do forget if it's a 610 or 620. The reason why we did that was Kyle spoke to a gentleman he knows that specializes in axles, and with the 6.7 Power Stroke engine, with the transmission that was in the donor truck, which is now in this, and the application I'm going to be using it for, which is hauling equipment, materials, and stuff like that to job sites, he thought that the higher gear ratio of a 610 or 620 would work best for this truck. Now, he did all the math, did stuff like that. So at the end of the day, we should be able to maintain 70 to 80 miles an hour around 18 to 2,000 RPMs, which is not a whole lot for this engine. That's pretty low. So I'm happy with that. I trust Kyle. I trust Kyle's contact, all his math. He showed it to us. I obviously don't know what I'm doing with the numbers, so the fact that he is doing the math out, I just kind of have to trust him, and I do. So we're going to run with that, and hence why I bought this specific rear axle. But getting past what the gear ratio is, one nice thing about replacing the hub assemblies is, even though it's a sting to the wallet, when the time comes to drive this down the road, say we have 10, 15, 20,000 pounds that we're hauling. It is going to be so nice and such a relief knowing that the rear axle is brand new, well, relatively brand new, right? The new hub assembly is brand spanking new. All the gears, or all the bearings, excuse me, all the seals, and the new brake rotors are all brand new on this truck. So knowing that it should stop, it should have no issues hauling, is going to be a huge sign of relief when that time comes. So even though it cost me quite a bit of money to fix my mistake and run these wheels and tires, just knowing that everything is going to be brand new and should be completely operable is going to be a huge sign of relief, especially when we incorporate the new spring packs, or the repacked spring packs. Everything should go by smooth, should work exactly how they are meant to work. So second, third, fourth point about a rear axle swap is, if you're doing this on your own, should be quick and easy as long as you kind of do your homework beforehand. If you're swapping out a later model or an earlier model rear axle into an older truck, the rear axle works perfectly. Everything should line up. This is a 15, 16 rear axle. So if you're doing that type of swap on an older Ford, you're going to be very pleased with a rear axle swap. Now, another reason why I was so adamant about doing a rear axle swap is we took the entire wiring harness from our donor truck, and it's a 2016 donor truck. So the reason why I wanted a 15-16 rear axle was, one, we're getting rid of the air brakes. We went to hydraulic, so that's a huge selling point. Two, the donor truck is obviously hydraulic brakes, and I have all the wiring harnesses for it. So this rear axle should hypothetically be a complete plug and play when the time comes to wire everything, once body paint, all that stuff is done. So even things like the emergency brake cable that goes right here, it's actually in the drum right there, it's not on the actual wheels themselves, that will go towards the front of the truck, and it should, to our knowledge and what we've done research-wise, it should hook up to the emergency brake cable that we have in the truck. So obviously this isn't hooked up right now. We have a shield that goes over this. It'll go down to the frame and all the way back. So that's another selling point. Just hook that up, we're good to go. Second one is all of the wiring that goes to these wheels. So your TSP sensors, things like that. That's also going to be a plug-and-play system. We have the wiring harness guy right here. We have some right here. I believe that is more for the lights. That goes back towards the back for the tail lights. But all the wiring should be a plug-and-play. Now we plugged in a couple of them, the female and male, and they do work together. Now I don't know once the truck is running what kind of codes we'll get, because obviously, if you have the right male and female plug, they obviously will connect to each other, but that doesn't mean that's where they're supposed to go, because there's so many connectors on a wiring harness like this. So we will just have to, at the very end, once we're done with all the wiring, obviously have to go back through things, make sure everything's operable, make sure this rear axle stops, because that's the whole point of it, is to brake and be able to haul things for the truck. But we are super stoked with how well this rear axle went. I know I'm just blabbering on, and if you're doing a rear axle swap without this wiring harness or without this engine, this information is probably not useful to you at all. But I just really wanted to point out that that's the reason why we did it. Now you can get hydraulic or air brakes of a newer Ford rear end. I'm sure it'd work all the same. I'm sure it would install all the same. Super quick, super easy. So if that's the route you're going, really don't worry about the wiring harness because you might have to do your own thing. I'm really only pointing out just how quick and easy this rear axle swap was, and everything else around it, where it comes to the wiring harness, the emergency brake pedal or cable, that's specific to our build. So you might ignore that, but I just wanted to point out just how easy the swap was. So if you're going to do it. It's not scary. Literally, you remove the old one, bring the new one in, everything mounts up perfectly, and you are on your way. So that brings me to the front axle. The front axle is going to give us, and has given us, a little bit more issues than the rear axle, just because there's a few more components that go into the front axle than the rear. The rear, we just had to make sure the pilot holes matched up, make sure that everything in terms of U-bolts worked, the upper and lower mounts worked, and that's it. When you come to the front axle, we have things like the steering box, the steering horn, we have shocks, we have spring packs. We have a lot more components that have to be fine-tuned and work specifically in order to make this front axle work. So on this one, I went to Amman, Idaho, whichever one you want to pronounce it, and grabbed a front axle out of another totaled, hear me out, 2015 or 2016 6.7 Power Stroke. Now, this one was an F750, so, but also I believe that, the 650 and 750s are probably the same. Now, they might differ in terms of axle strength and weight, so you might need to look into that. Now, I made sure that the rear axle, speaking of that, was over the weight capacity and hauling capacity as the factory one, because this does have a 27,500 pound, let me see, yep, right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. Right there. 27,500 pound GVWR, which is your total gross weight for the truck. So I had to make sure that the rear axle was capable of that kind of load, because when you swap out an axle, you don't want to swap something out for something that's smaller or has less capacity and capabilities. I mean, you could, but if you're going to haul with it, like I'm planning on it, I don't want to do that. So I made sure that the front axle ratio or load capacity was the same, if not more, and this one is. So it's also a 10 lug bolt pattern compared to that one, which was just 8 lug. I had to verify that. Don't worry, when I bought it, I double, triple, quadruple checked. I even, before I went to go pick it up, I called the yard and said, hey, I need to make sure this is a 10 lug. And they're like, yeah, look at the pictures. I'm like, no, can you verify it? I'm dumb and bought something wrong the last time. So we got it, brought it in. It gave us a little bit of a headache to get it in, but same as the rear axle, the front removed super quickly, super fast, and not hard at all. We just hooked up the wheels and tires, rolled the new one underneath, and that's where the party started for sure. So I do want to point out a couple issues you're going to have with your front axle if you do a front axle swap. So almost everything you're going to have issues with. So let's start with steering box. Now, your steering box can fit in the same location. However, your steering horn is going to be wrong. So if you're trying to attach it to the axle horn, which is right there, and then you have this cross member that comes to here, then you have this guy right here that goes up to your steering box. In order to make that work, you have to loosen up this guy right here, and it's got teeth on the inside. So you loosen up the bolt, and what you have to do is you have to tick it back a couple times in order to get this pitman arm and horn in the proper location. So once you do that, you can re-bolt it and you're fine. Inside with all the teeth, you can literally feel it tick, or you can just kind of move it over a little bit, so you definitely know kind of where you're at. Now, the factory position is more down, or I believe. Don't quote me on this. Obviously, it's either more down or more up. So we had to fine tune it in order to get this steering horn and these tires straight. The reason for that is if you keep it in the same location, what you end up having is you're able to turn it more to one side than you can the other side. So the reason why we have to adjust the pitman arm is so that way you have the same range of motion when you're turning right as you do left. And so we have that, we've maintained that, but it does take a little adjusting. But don't be scared, it literally is quick and easy. You unbolt that, you cock it back to where you need it, and you rebolt it, and you're good to go. Everything besides that worked out really well. The steering horn popped right in. The angle of it works well, and obviously you can tell we have a nut on it, the big old nut. It works really well, so we're happy with that. The next issue is the, why am I having a brain fart? The spring packs. The spring packs on this 1516 are a lot wider than the spring packs of the 1976 F750. Now you would think that because it's an F750 you would have bulkier spring packs, and that is actually not the case, which is surprising. You can look, and I'll show you right now, that the spring packs for the 1516 are much wider. If you look at these U-bolts, see how they're, I don't know, about half an inch to an inch on each side. They're more narrow. These spring packs, I believe, are only 2.5 or 3 inches wide, whereas the spring packs on the 1516, oh gosh, I want to say are 3.5 to 4 inches wide. Don't quote me on any of this. This is mainly just to kind of show you what problems you'll run into. Don't take anything I say as gospel as saying, oh, he said they're this specific width and this specific height. I'm just telling you the issues you're going to run into if you do these types of swaps, and hopefully it doesn't cause you a headache and you can kind of navigate that any way you want. So what we're having to do is the lower bracket that usually goes on these, there's a bottom plate that sits right here. And what that does is there's a bottom little bolt that goes into the pilot hole of the axle. And then on the top, it also has another pilot hole that the spring pack goes into. And what that does is it keeps it on there and it keeps it centered. Well, we can't get that plate on there because these U-bolts can't go through it and bolt. So what we're having to do is we're having a custom built plate that will have the plate that goes on the axle with the pilot hole on the bottom. And then it's going to go up to here, up against the spring pack, and go up. So that way the spring pack is centered on that plate. And then we're going to be able to use the same bolts that we came with the axle, the 2015-16, and we'll be able to go straight down and utilize this. So it's going to be like plate right here, and then a wall up against the spring pack on each side. And I'm trying to use both my hands in order to show you. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to do. Imagine just a plate on the bottom, and then on each side of the spring pack, you're going to have a wall up it that's welded to the bottom plate, and that's going to keep everything centered. And then we're going to take the original U-bolts from the 1516 and go right through the factory holes, and it'll suck this in, suck it tight, and keep it centered on that. So we're happy with that. I mean, we're not happy that we have to do it, but we're happy with an easy resolution and easy fix in terms of that. It just takes us a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra money to have it manufactured, drawn up, and welded into place. We would do it ourselves. However, Kyle has a buddy who's an extremely good fabricator and welder. And he told me, he was like, dude, we're not even going to waste our time with it. He's good, he's fast, he's efficient, and I like that. So that's what we're doing when it comes to the spring packs. Now, the next thing is shocks. Shocks are actually going to mount up perfectly. And the reason for that is this shock mount right here is not attached to the axle. It's actually attached to the spring pack. So it doesn't change the fact that we swapped it out. The reason why I removed them was to A, make it easier to install this new axle, and B, we're going to get new shocks. These are probably the original shocks from this truck because it only had like 20 some odd thousand miles on it and got parked. So we're going to buy new shocks. They mount right here and go right there. So we will have that. That should do it. Now, another nice thing about this being a 1516 is all of our wiring, any hydraulic, stuff like that, it'll mount up and bolt or click into place perfectly. This might not pertain to you because you might not have a 6-7 power stroke and need a 2015-16 front axle in terms of a wiring harness capability. But that's one reason why we went with the 1516 instead of, you could find a 2000 or 2005 or 2010. This is why we went with the 1516 front and rear, because switch to hydraulic brakes and keep everything a plug-and-play system. All right, you guys, my GoPro just died. Said it overheated, which probably means one thing. I've been talking way too long about this front end axle for this truck. So let me wrap it up really quickly and give you guys a short little rundown on the whole point of this video. If you are looking to swap a new or new-ish axle, front or rear, into your older Ford, and you are wondering, can you do it? Will they fit? Will I have issues with it? The short answer is yes, you can do it, and no, you shouldn't have issues. Now, you will have a couple things which I've already elaborated on, but the short, quick answer is yes, you can do it. The rear axle is super quick, super easy. You just have to find an axle gear ratio that you like. You need to make sure that your wheels and tires will fit, whether they're 8 or 10 lug, on your new rear axle. Make sure it's a 10 or 8 lug bolt pattern. But the swap itself, removing the old one, bringing in the new one, is not hard. It's quick and easy. Like I said, 30 minutes to an hour. Now, I would suggest repacking your springs. If your axle is already out, might as well repack your springs. It's not very cost heavy. It's very cost efficient. I think it's very rewarding, and to have that security, I would highly recommend repacking your springs. So rear axle, very quick, very easy. You can do it on yourself. You can do it by yourself. Maybe get help from a buddy to make it easier, but you can definitely do it by yourself. Quick and easy, in a weekend, in a day, very fast. Short little recap of the front axle. Very quick to remove the old one, very quick to bring the new one in. You're going to have issues with your horn, with your steering box a little bit, and you're going to have to adjust a couple things when it comes to your steering and pitman arm. Your shocks will mount back up because they don't change. Your mounting points do not change unless you get new springs, which if you don't need to, I wouldn't. I would just get them repacked like we're going to. The only issue besides the gearbox, horn, and pitman arm are the spring packs themselves not being wide enough. So you are going to either have to replace them with maybe the same spring packs that you're buying your axle from, the truck, or you're going to have to make a new lower mount to accommodate the thinner and more narrow spring packs of your older truck. Now, I don't know what year that the spring packs go from 2.5 or 3.5 inches to the wider spring packs of this axle. I'm sure there's information out there. You might be able to get away with, I don't know, an early 2000s, 2005, 2010, I don't know, maybe even 2012 front axle, and maybe that will accommodate the spring pack. I would think that the spring pack is narrow up until the 80s, maybe the 90s. So anything after that, I would assume you're going to need a new lower spring pack mount, which will either need to be fabricated or you're going to have to buy one online, which this is custom, so I can't buy one online, so it has to be made. So that's it. Quick and easy, quick and dirty. If you're trying to do a front axle swap or a rear axle swap, those are the issues you're going to run into. Those are the things you're going to kind of want to do and watch out for in terms of your hub assemblies, things like that. And in the long run, it is a very quick, very easy thing. Not a whole lot of tools are required, not a whole lot of knowledge is required. Just very basic things. You can do it in a day probably, both of them. You could probably do it in a weekend for sure. But if you're going to make the swap, I would suggest doing it. I hope I gave you guys all the information you guys need, and I hope this video gives you some sort of knowledge into how to do a front and rear axle swap. All right, you guys, that's going to be a wrap for today's video. I know we didn't do an in-depth, step-by-step process on how to axle swap your specific truck. There are so many different types of axles and so many different type of truck applications that it's kind of impossible to do a specific step-by-step for your truck precisely. So what we wanted to do was just give you guys a little rundown on how we did our axle swap on my 1976 CrewCab and kind of what to look out for and what to be cautious of when you buy axles and when you go to install them on your personal truck. So we really hope you guys got some value out of this truck. We really appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next one.